Imagine sending your child to school in the morning and not knowing if they'll come home. For millions of families across northern Nigeria, this isn't a fear. It's a routine. A grim, repeated reality that has played out again and again, in classrooms, on highways, inside churches, in quiet farming villages most of the world has never heard of. This is Africa's most populous nation. The so-called Giant of Africa. Home to over 200 million people, a booming film industry, world-class music, and some of the continent's brightest minds. But beneath that giant's feet, a different story is unfolding. One of armed men on motorcycles. Of ransom phone calls. Of mass graves and empty classrooms. Today, we are going to trace this crisis from its roots, through the rise of an insurgency that shocked the world, to the bandit economy that grew in its shadow, to the question every Nigerian is now asking out loud. Has President Bola Tinubu failed them? This is the story of Nigeria's abduction crisis. To understand what's happening in Nigeria today, we have to go back more than 2 decades, to a city called Maiduguri, in Borno State, in Nigeria's far northeast. In 2002, a preacher named Muhammad Yusuf founded a religious movement. Its real name was long and complicated, a phrase that roughly translates to people committed to the Prophet's teachings for propagation and jihad. But locals gave it a simpler name, one that would become infamous across the world, Boko Haram. Loosely translated, it means Western education is forbidden. At first, it was a study group, strict, isolationist, but not yet violent. Yusuf preached against what he saw as corruption, inequality, and the influence of the West on Nigerian society. To many young, poor, and disillusioned men in the North, his message resonated. Then, in 2009, everything changed. A clash between Boko Haram members and Nigerian security forces escalated into open conflict. Yusuf was captured and killed while in police custody. Instead of ending the movement, his death lit a fuse. Leadership passed to a man named Abubakar Shako, a name that would soon become synonymous with terror. Under Shako, Boko Haram transformed from a local sect into one of the deadliest armed groups on the planet. By the time the world was paying attention, it was already a humanitarian catastrophe. Over the past 15 years, this insurgency has killed an estimated 500,000 people across northeastern Nigeria and the surrounding Lake Chad region, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, with countless more displaced, abducted, or maimed. In 2015, the group pledged allegiance to ISIS, rebranding part of itself as ISWAP, the Islamic State West Africa province. A year later, it split again, with factions fighting each other as much as the Nigerian state. 3 Nigerian presidents, Goodluck Jonathan, Muhammadu Buhari, and now Bola Tinubu, have all, at different points, declared Boko Haram defeated or on its last legs. Reality tells a different story. While the world's camera stayed fixed on Boko Haram in the northeast, a second, quieter crisis was growing in Nigeria's northwest. Here, the threat doesn't always wear the label of terrorist or a jihadist. It goes by a different name, bandits. These armed groups, often riding in large convoys of motorcycles, emerged largely from conflicts between farming communities and herders, disputes over land, water, and grazing routes that have existed for generations. Over time, some of these armed groups evolved into something else entirely, a criminal industry built on kidnapping for ransom. Analysts describe what's happening in Nigeria's northwest not as a single insurgency, but as a complex web, banditry, warlordism, and intercommunal violence, all tangled together. And in recent years, jihadist factions from the northeast, including ISWAP and a group called Ansoro, have been trying to expand into this region, attempting to recruit bandit networks into their cause. The result is a security nightmare with blurred lines. Is an attack terrorism, banditry, a kidnapping for profit operation. Often, it's all 3 at once. And the numbers are staggering. According to a security risk report by Beacon Consulting, since President Tinubu's inauguration in May 2023, Nigeria has recorded over 13,000 deaths and more than 9,000 abductions, spanning 667 local government areas across the country. In just the first 4 months of 2026 alone, Amnesty International documented at least 1,100 people kidnapped across northern Nigeria, and the organization has warned that this constitutes a breach of Nigeria's constitutional and human rights obligations. Numbers can numb us. So let's talk about people. In November 2025, government carried out one of the most shocking attacks in recent memory. Hundreds of school children abducted in a coordinated strike across Kebbi and Niger states. Some children were released within a week. Others stayed in captivity for over a month, freed only in batches, 24 here, 100 there, 130 more just before the year ended. President Tinubu publicly thanked security forces for securing those releases. But human rights observers noted something troubling. The government never disclosed who carried out the attacks, and no arrests or prosecutions were ever announced. Then came 2026, and it got worse. On February 3rd, armed men invaded Woro village in Kwara State. They killed 200 people. They abducted 176 more. On May 15th, terrorists struck 3 schools in Oyo State's Oriaya area in a single coordinated assault, killing 2 people and abducting around 39 pupils and 7 teachers. On that same day, in Borno State, over 40 school children were taken from Asaira Yuba. Weeks later, many of those children were still not free. And then there's the human cost that doesn't make headlines as often, the everyday Nigerians. A 43-year-old woman named Olaide Adigok was on her way to drop her twin sons off at school when kidnappers struck. She spent days in captivity before being released. On June 1, 2026, just days ago as of this telling, bandits stormed a community in Kogi State, kidnapping around 25 people, including passengers on a public commercial bus. 2 people were killed. 5 were injured. Soldiers managed to rescue 23 of those taken, but the attack proved the hard truth: even buses on public roads are no longer safe. Amnesty International's Nigeria director, Aise Sonusi, has described what victims endure in captivity: torture, starvation, beatings, sexual violence, and forced participation in the very crimes committed against them. Some victims spend months at the mercy of their captors, waiting for a ransom that may or may not come. And there's a darker layer to this story too, one that's becoming an open secret. Increasingly, some of the people facilitating these kidnappings aren't outsiders at all. Reports and local accounts suggest that in certain communities, locals, people who know the terrain, the routines, the routes, have been complicit in identifying targets and enabling kidnappings for a cut of the ransom. When the threat comes from both outside and within, trust itself becomes a casualty. This brings us to the question burning across Nigerian social media: what has the government actually done? In November 2025, facing mounting pressure, President Tinubu's administration effectively declared a security emergency. In Nigeria's Senate, lawmakers debated the crisis directly. One senator raised an alarming detail: that soldiers had reportedly been withdrawn from a school in Kebbi State just hours before bandits stormed it. The Deputy Senate President went further, suggesting Nigeria may need to seek help from international partners to contain the violence, an admission that the country's own security forces may not be enough. But here's where the story gets politically complicated. As 2026 has unfolded, reports have emerged that Tinubu's political team is already maneuvering toward a second term in the 2027 general election, even as families wait for loved ones to come home from captivity. Critics argue this reveals a government more focused on political survival than national security. Yet the picture isn't entirely one-sided. Some analysts argue that, 3 years into Tinubu's presidency, the situation, while still dire, has shown signs of improvement in certain areas. They point to faster rescue operations following major abductions and note that, while kidnappings haven't stopped, the response time has improved compared to previous years. Others push back hard on that framing. They argue insecurity has actually spread geographically, from its traditional strongholds in the northeast and northwest into new territory, including areas close to the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja itself. If true, that means the crisis isn't shrinking. It's just rearranging. Even Nigeria's own police force has pushed back on some of the abduction statistics reported by Amnesty International, disputing the scale of the numbers, a dispute that, to many ordinary Nigerians, looks less like clarification and more like denial. So, has Tinubu failed Nigerians? The honest answer is, It depends on who you ask, and which Nigeria they are living in. If you're a political analyst in Abuja watching rescue operation statistics, you might see modest progress. If you're a parent in Borno, Kebbi, Niger, Kwara, or Oyo State, still waiting for a child, a sibling, a spouse to come home, the word progress probably doesn't mean much at all. Why should this matter to the rest of us, in Ghana, in Kenya, in South Africa, anywhere else on this continent? Because Nigeria isn't just any country. It's Africa's largest economy. Its most populous nation. A cultural and political heavyweight whose stability, or instability, sends ripples across the entire West African region and beyond. When a government loses the trust of its people on the most basic promise any state can make, the promise of safety, it doesn't just affect that one country. It becomes a cautionary tale. A test case. A warning. For Pan-Africanists, for anyone who believes in a united, secure, self-determined Africa, what's happening in Nigeria right now is not a distant headline. It's a mirror, one that every African government should be looking into. The story of Nigeria's abduction crisis isn't really a story about bandits, or terrorists, or even politicians. It's a story about ordinary people, school children, farmers, mothers, bus passengers, caught between a violence that's evolved faster than the systems meant to stop it, and a government still struggling to answer a simple question. Who is really in control? Until that question is answered, honestly, and with action, not just statements, the headlines will keep coming. And so will the empty seats in classrooms across northern Nigeria. If this video opened your eyes to what's really happening in Nigeria, share it. Talk about it. Because silence is exactly what allows these stories to keep repeating. This has been Magma Decoded. Until next time, stay informed, stay connected, stay African.